So yeah, first of all, a massive welcome to Dr. Jay Weixelbaum. He is a longtime friend of the stream. And the last time Jay was here, we talked a lot about his podcast and things that maybe people didn't know a whole lot about. So, Jay, why don't you just give yourself a quick introduction to the folks watching, and talk a little bit about your area of expertise. So
Sure.
we see doctor in front of your name. What does that mean?
Uh, Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Jay Weixelbaum. Maddie, thanks so much for having me on. I am a PhD in history. My area of expertise is the history of Americans doing business with Nazis. Once upon a time, I was an art school dropout and just wanting to paint and play in bands. And during the day, I was working in the mortgage industry. As a matter of fact, this is before the crash, and I saw some very interesting, unsettling things. Working for $10 an hour, processing and sending big batches of mortgage securities out into the world. And so one day I came across a book that talked about businesses and Nazis, and I was thinking a lot about business ethics at the time. And so I quit my job and went back to school and fell down the rabbit hole and got 3 degrees in the
Just
topic.
three? Just three?
Just, yeah, I cut myself off at that point. No more.
Right on. I mean, that's incredible. And so, tell us a little bit about what you were studying specifically, especially with your PhD research, because for those of you who are not familiar with how PhDs work, the majority of it is research. So, tell us a little bit about how you got that DR next to your name.
Yeah. Yeah. If you, this is good because I think a lot of folks may see PhDs in history of the Twitter historian world or whatever, but don't really know what we actually do to get the credential. And it's one of the longest PhD programs in the humanities PhD world. It takes about 7 years. And
Jeez.
this is after a master's degree. And you spend a lot of that time, if you're a U.S. historian, you spend a lot of time thinking about the big ideas in that area. What Civil War, the Progressive Movement, New Deal, World War I and II, post-war Civil Rights Movement, so on. And then you read a lot of history, obviously, and you talk. There's this thing called historiography we learn, which is the history of history, which is really important uh, for our field. But I think it's important for other people to understand is that it's people studying, say, the Civil War in 1900. It's going to be very different from the way people studied the Civil War in, say, 1950. It's going to be very different in the way people study it now. And so there are these contours of like historical debates, what sources we use, how we frame them. And so that's kind of like the bread and butter. So we have to do a lot of training just in that area. But then, yeah, and then the other component is the research component where, we are kind of sent out into the world once we finish all our classes and comprehensive exams to go and do research. And
Wow.
typically you have to get kind of a plan approved before you do that. Originally, I wanted to study a Wall Street firm. My plan was, it because you only have one dissertation, you can't write forever, and I didn't want to because you're student loans and all that. And
Yep.
um,
That makes
so
sense.
right, I wanted to pick like kind of a focal point, and this Wall Street firm that I was looking at, and did business with a lot of different companies that were involved with Nazi Germany, but being them being a Wall Street firm, it was very hard to find sources to
Mm,
actually. You have to, in order to do history, you have to have a source in which to
right.
look at and interpret and say something about. So ultimately, I ended up writing a dissertation about Ford, General Motors, and IBM with the goal of of trying to find out what the perspective of the American managers were. If I'm trying to say something about business ethics, the kind of key hinging idea in business ethics is um, choice. Do you have a choice?
Right.
And if you have a choice, you have some responsibility, right? If you don't have a choice, then you can argue that you have any responsibility, which is conveniently what many companies that have been accused of it argue. So,
Yep.
so I was looking for evidence of choice, evidence of agency, and it turns out the reason I chose Ford, General Motors, IBM is because those were big, fairly sizable bodies of documents that the public can actually access. You can go, as just as I did, and go find these bodies of sources. To some extent,
Right.
I also documented how there was actually some efforts in real time while I was working on them to kind of hinder my access to them. And
Wow.
there's plenty of stories there I could tell. Um,
Mm.
and so yeah, so obviously, well, not obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but I did find a lot of evidence of agency, of choice, in these documents. These American managers knew what they were doing. Um, I kind of, the shortest kind of example that I can give is that General Motors, they were planning to sell off their entire infrastructure that they had owned in Germany. They were considering this in 1938, which is like really right before everything really starts in Europe in World War II.
Right.
And then they just decide, you know what? No, we're gonna stick with it. We're gonna keep going. So obviously there was a process, and people were thinking, should I be doing this? They're Nazis.
Interesting.
um,
Yeah.
anyway,
Well, and I mean, it wasn't like up until the war actually started, people forget that they held what, like a Nazi party rally or something in Madison Square Garden. Like it
yes.
wasn't something before that like was, I mean, obviously there are people that agreed or disagreed with their philosophy or their sort of like approach to governing, but it wasn't so unheard of prior to World War II to have a kind of friendly relationship with the Nazis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's you kind of hear that rejoinder, rebuttal, counter argument these days. Oh, no, nobody knew how bad
Right.
it was,
Mm.
and I that's something my academic advisors, mentors actually had me add into my dissertation just to make sure everybody knew that and of course, yes, there was a massive rally of Nazis marching through, well, American Nazis, and I know that's something you want to talk about.
Hmm.
American fans of Nazism, for sure, marching through the streets of New York City in 1939, or excuse me, yeah, 39,
Hmm.
which is actually one of the things I am including in this new project I want to tell everybody about.
Ooh, yes. Well, so that would be amazing. And I know like the last time we spoke, I remember just being, I think I ended up being a terrible interviewer because I was so like drawn in by these stories that you have and how it really did play out like a film noir. Um, that it
Yeah,
really is. And then of course you couple that with the time period, how we were on the precipice of war and this was happening, and you have people saying, oh, but we didn't know how terrible they actually were. We didn't know. I mean, it's funny because I saw the other day when, I forget who it was, but it was Tucker Carlson was in wherever that was, like, was it Hungary or some other, like, he was basically like
oh
palling
yeah,
around with like a far right
with Viktor
extremist.
Orban.
Yep. And I couldn't help but think, like, hmm, like we know how how like
Yeah,
oppressive and bad these people are, and yet we have these prominent personalities going and kind of applauding them for their work. So not too far removed
no,
from where we
no.
are. But like, let's
Uh,
talk about your new project.
yeah, so I graduated, I got the doctorate, and then
Congrats.
I was trying to figure out the job market for higher ed is, well, non-existent right now, for historians. So I had to do some other stuff. Worked in politics, which is how I met you and
Hmm.
and other friends. As a writer, and some other things, and then 2020 happened, and we all lost something in 2020. For me, it was really hard. In the first month of that year, I lost my job and my dad. Um,
I'm sorry
And
to hear that.
yeah, it was tough, and I had a lot of time to sit at home and think about what the next step was. Now, the reason I mentioned my dad is that he was his name's Martin West. They had to change it. He's old enough where they had to change his Jewish sounding Weixelbaum to
Wow.
West. But he was an actor and producer for more than 50 years.
Wow.
And so I kind of grew up in that world in Southern California. My dad being on TV and film and stuff. Was never in anything terribly famous. He worked with Hitchcock and John Carpenter and a few others,
Wow.
but more in smaller roles. And
Well,
he
but
was
he
on
worked
he
for
was on
50 years, so he must have been doing
yeah,
something
yeah.
right, you know?
He's on General Hospital. He was a soap star. He's
Oh,
a
cool.
very handsome gentleman. But anyway, so I was trying to find a way to. I was trying like I knew that I wanted to do something with this degree, whether I was going to write, expected to write a book or something like that, and I wanted to find some way to honor him, to honor his memory. And I had been playing around with the idea of putting this history on screen for a while, and he had always encouraged me. And so that spring, the pandemic spring, I founded Elusive Films. That's Elusive, and the whole with the whole idea of taking this research that I had done in my in the history programs and putting it on screen. History and film in context
Yeah.
is our tagline, and so the plan was to make a short film, kind of just a tiny slice of a story, to go out on the film festival circuit and get in front of industry people, to pitch for a dramatized TV series, not a documentary, but actual
Mhm.
dramatized series, which is a decision I made early on because I want people to make more of a human connection to the people in these moments. And as you said, it's like kind of tailor-made film noir, true crime, true stories. Um, and then the other part of that plan is to do a podcast, as you mentioned, or as we were just talking about earlier. Maybe perhaps we went live, but also to do a podcast to build an audience so that we can raise funds to shoot this short film. Making films is expensive. We
Yes.
want to raise. I think our budget for the short film is $38,000. That's what we're trying to raise,
That's a
and
modest
so
budget as far as like
yeah,
filmmaking goes. So
I
yeah.
know, I know, right? We're trying to do the best we can, and to to tantalize your listeners just for a moment. This story, I came across a very dramatic story that is not for General Motors and IBM. It touches upon these things, but it wasn't very dissertation-y. I couldn't really use it to
Okay.
write the dissertation. Was it because I wasn't writing like a drama piece? I was writing an academic piece and trying to advance knowledge on the topic. But
Hmm.
I call it A Nazi on Wall Street. That is the name of this project. And I this so when I was studying this law firm, on the German side, there was a businessman, a German lawyer, who was working with the Wall Street law firm and basically helping clients, American clients who wanted to do business in Nazi Germany, and got very successful.
Huh.
So much so that he was tapped by the SS and SD, the SS intelligence people. So really dark and nefarious group of folks to go on a spy mission, to give it with a fake name and everything, along with another Nazi spy, a honest to goodness German baroness, uh, to go to New York City in 1940, kind of at the precipice of war,
Hmm.
right? Um, and recruit American corporate executives to support a Nazi-dominated Europe. That Nazi Europe would be good for business, but there was a Jewish FBI agent, which is pretty rare unto itself during this period of time, who was just put in charge of the New York City office and knew this guy was coming.
What a
So
coincidence.
I know,
What fate, you know?
I know. Well, it so happened that the guy who was running the FBI New York office, this really interesting Southern gentleman character by the name of Foxworth, Agent Foxworth, he was put.
That's like the most
I
FBI
know,
name I've ever
I
heard.
know, right?
Oh my
Right?
God.
He was put in charge of a brand new office, and this has never been. I shouldn't even be. I'm telling you, but this has never been portrayed on screen, according to the head historian of the FBI, who I've been working with a little bit. The FBI in 1940. This is not unknown history; it's well known, but it's just never been on screen. They created a secret worldwide counterintelligence office called the SIS, and it was inside the 30 Rock building, inside Rockefeller Center, with a fake business front called the Import Export Company. And Foxworth went to head this, and they were sending basically FBI agents all over Latin America and other places to hunt Nazis. And so they needed a new head of the New York office. So in comes our main character of the story, who's now, his mission is to hunt down this Nazi spy and stop him. And this Nazi spy, in fact, has a celebration with a bunch of American businessmen on the eve of the fall of Paris to the Nazis, with in a posh New York hotel, and that is going to be the short film. We're going to portray some of that on screen.
I mean, that it sounds like almost like an Avengers movie, because so many of these big action movies are all about like these secret organizations that hunt down Nazis and bring them to justice. And I mean, the fake storefront is right out of that kind of genre.
Right.
I worked diagonally across the street from Rock Center. That used to be, I went to the freaking gym, what's it called? The like fancy gym there. So now I'm thinking like, that's like where I was every day. There was
it was in there. It was
wow.
in there. Yeah, this is it's all true. It's all real history. And so there's so many businesses and American executives, and the spy is talking to everybody. And there's some people on Wall Street where they're kind of, you're not really sure where they are. Are they working for corporate America and the Nazis? Are they we're building our intelligence agencies. Many of those people are also involved with that. At the same time, you're not sure where people's loyalties lie, and all this is an incredible story that somehow, with all the World War II movies we've had in American culture, somehow none of this has ever been portrayed on screen.
I mean, it's like one of those, like, what is it, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spot, like
yes.
It's like one of those.
Yes.
It's fascinating. It'll tell me. So like I know when the Baroness and the guy who was almost like a connector on Wall Street, or he was a guy you could network with.
The spy.
Yeah, and then became a spy. What was this happening? So were they putting feelers out to business, like American businesses before? Like it sounds like they were almost laying the groundwork, knowing that at some point they were going to engage in a larger war. Like they had those grander goals. Is that would that be an accurate thing to say?
Sure. And also, I mean, it's not like Hitler was shy or secret about his plans. He was like, "What do you want? Living space. We're looking at all these other countries. You know, we're gonna take
we're
them,
looking
right?
to expand.
Yeah,
like
I
Poland's
need the other
looking
little
nice.
boy's desk as well. You know,
yeah, right. It's feeling a little cozy, and I'd love to add an annex. You know, so we have a little bit of leg room. Yeah, like so. It sounds like, but as part of that. I mean, it sounds like they kind of knew that the only way they'd be able to succeed is if they had the economic power of like American businesses behind them, or at least that some of that support.
Yeah. I mean, this comes up all the time. It's just a little anecdote, but worth putting out there. You know, like people are like, I drive a Volkswagen. I'm so guilty. They hear what I'm studying, and they apologize to me. Like I can do anything. And if the first thing I tell them is, actually, Volkswagen was just an idea. It was just a glimmer in Ferdinand Porsche's eye. You want to feel guilty? Don't drive a General Motors vehicle.
True.
General Motors built more things with wheels for the Nazis than pretty much almost any other company out there. And this kind of dovetails with my other reaction to what you're saying about kind of like, did this come out of nowhere? Was this kind of planned? You know, American businesses, the laws regarding American companies being able to operate overseas changed in the mid 20s, and it was just a bonanza. All these companies went out and set up subsidiaries in Europe and other places, and General Motors bought Opel. OPEL, which in Europe is well known. It's, I see it on soccer jerseys all the time, but they owned it until fairly recently, until a few years ago, and it was the largest car maker in Europe. It's situated in the suburb outside Frankfurt.
Okay.
And so the key to kind of uh, the German military manager's strategy was, blitzkrieg, as we all know, move really fast in and out. And the way you do that is with supply lines. And the only way you have supply lines is with an armada of trucks that General Motors built. So that was something I spent a lot of time obviously working on. But if you want to talk responsibility or share of involvement, Volkswagen is not where you want to look.
Right.
General Motors is where you want to look.
I mean, I think people assume that because there's that famous picture of Hitler standing next to a VW Bug. And because, but like, and people forget, it's like, no, Volkswagen literally translates to the people's car, the people's vehicle, Volkswagen. So like, and there, I mean, I remember based on our last conversation, there were a lot of like factories and other things that were owned by, or like they were subsidiaries of other companies. And then when the war ended, a lot of them were just usurped by the Soviets because they divided up Germany on who was going to help rebuild, and they ended up
considered the spoils
losing money.
Like, yeah. They lost money. Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, there was no profit. That's the irony, I guess. To reprise our earlier conversation, is that Americans that did business in Germany, they have this legacy now, which really is never going away. They may think or like it to, and they may act. There's a whole kind of field in business ethics about remembering and forgetting, which we can talk about. But anyway, it's not going away. But then they never made any money on the deal. If you imagine the American businessmen arriving to survey their property in 1945, the end of the war, provided they can even. They're not on the Soviet occupied side where they're literally just unbolting everything and moving it because like they thought we lost, millions of people were owed this. But you're a businessman going to your site. First of all, it's a smoking husk because it's probably been bombed to hell by both the Royal Air Force and the the Americans. And then if you have money in your bank account, it's full of Nazi Reichsmarks, which you cannot spend.
Right.
So what are you going to do with these great profits? The biggest payout, and I think I mentioned this last time, but it's worth repeating it because it boggles people's minds every time. The biggest payout I ever saw, biggest profit windfall, was to General Motors, as a matter of fact. And it was actually through an American program which compensated business owners for damage from bombing from our own troops. The fund was set up around $10 million, and actually GM charged above that. So they basically took the whole fund. Wow. And I even found memos that said, we wrote to the American government, we wrote off the slave labor barracks. We won't charge Americans for them. So thank you for that, GM. But yeah, that was the biggest payout I saw in my research.
So I want to go back really quickly to this because I can't get past this notion of Nazi hunters and people like sending spies internationally to like find Nazis. Because I think when I think of Nazis abroad or where they fled to, you mentioned Latin America. I always think there's like the saying that, they fled to Argentina, or there's those like fuzzy photos that are supposedly old and they're like, oh, could this be a former, like where did they have do you know where they had success for actually locating Nazis?
Even though there are these conspiracies about Hitler getting there, he never did. He did die in a bunker. We know this.
Fair. Boo. We like conspiracy theories here. But
I know.
Okay.
Well, here's just a side note to get people excited. He's starring in the short film My dad's best friend, his name is Keir Delay. He was the star of 2001: Space Odyssey. You may have seen the actor that
Yes.
he's going to be on this project because he was my dad's best friend. It's dedicated to my father. He's playing Henry Ford. And I don't want to ruin it if you haven't seen it, but there's a show. It's not historical. It's called Hunters, with Al Pacino and everything. And Keir Delay is in the very last scene of that film,
Ooh.
which kind of gives credence to this kind of crackerjack conspiracy that, of course, Hitler did escape to Latin America. But yeah, no. So the real history is
Yeah.
that there was a German connection. The oil companies, farming between Germany and South America, even prior to Nazi Germany. But it's these business raw materials,
Oh yeah.
trade connections, but especially in farming, but and oil. It was really important, obviously, to keeping a war machine going. But and so yeah, so you had Nazi operatives in various places, and the FBI knew that, and Roosevelt knew that, President Roosevelt. So that's why they set up this SIS part of the FBI. It was the very first time that we kind of had an outward-facing counterintelligence organization to go
Right.
out there
Well, this
and hunt people
predates.
down.
Sorry for interrupting you again, but like,
Yeah, yeah,
does this predate the CIA?
yeah, yeah. So
Mm.
there's I mean, this is more inside baseball stuff.
Yeah.
But there was there was kind of competition between emerging intelligence agencies during this time. We knew that there were Nazi spies all over the place, and full in America, all over Latin America, and other places. And so first, director J. Edgar Hoover, who's a very forceful personality, he was like, "This is my
Yeah.
domain. I'm going to create the SIS." But then there started to be competition between him and some other folks who wanted to create this thing called the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which ultimately became the precursor to the CIA a little bit later. So the OSS is kind of like the predecessor. SIS eventually faded in prominence and was replaced by OSS, which really took on the foreign intelligence part of the war effort a little bit later on.
Interesting.
And so yeah, this is all pre CIA.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So tell. I mean, what are some of the things that you would love my viewers to know about, like the story that you're telling, or even maybe something that you've covered on your podcast? Because I gotta say, like, well, I'm biased. I love like learning about media adjacent things. So when you guys were talking about the fairness doctrine and other things, I just was glued. I think that
Yeah.
was when you had an interview with a woman, Doctor. Oh, I can't. How can I pronounce it?
Oh, Dr. Weesty.
Yes, Weesty. That's right.
Yeah,
I
Victoria Weesty.
knew.
She's a friend. She's
Yeah,
great.
it was. Oh, and I was like glued to it. I was fascinated by it. But I don't know what is maybe like a something, a story, or something that's happened that you think people might not know about, in addition to all the other things that we have
Right.
no idea were happening.
Well, this is one part pitch and one part explanation. Uh, the whole purpose of the Nazi on Wall Street podcast is to build an audience and get people interested, and to donate to this project, which you can at elusivefilms.com, ELUSIV hyphen films.com. And this is why we have the podcast. We've given ourselves a pretty big challenge with this podcast because it's we want to build this world. We don't want to just tell you this whole story that I've just explained to you. And some people go on the podcast thinking they're going to hear a true crime drama. It is not that. It is far more than that. It's far more than that, because what we want to do is we want to connect this history to our current situation, for better or worse.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about, fascism, the New Deal, right-wing populism, anti-Semitism, is all highly relevant right now. And what we want to do, there's kind of three components to this. One is to find a topic that is very much related to this Nazi on Wall Street story. The second thing is to connect it to current events. And the third thing is to find an expert, besides me, some people that really know their stuff in a particular area, to
Yeah.
come and talk about this and shed some light on this. And sometimes it's an interesting challenge. Like, for instance, with current events, we would be remiss not to talk about the massive new civil rights movement we're in, Black Lives Matter and George Floyd.
Yes.
Is that directly related to a 1940s film noir crime drama? Well, perhaps not, but it was really important for us to do a then and now and connect the current civil rights movement to what was happening in the past. So we got Pulitzer Prize winning historian Taylor Branch to come on and talk about it. That's episode 5, I believe.
Yeah,
It's
that was
fairly
the
recent.
civil rights one.
Yeah. So we're trying to connect the past. Season 2, we're going to do more of that. We're going to get even closer to the story. We'll probably do some FBI history. We'll probably do. We want to do more stuff on the pandemic. There's a lot of really interesting kind of connections to how politics changed in earlier pandemics, going back to like medieval era. I mean,
Yeah.
part of what ended, part of what kind of cracked the strength of feudalism in Europe were the plagues in Europe. And
Yeah.
so, so it's kind of then and now. So even though, A Nazi on Wall Street is this about this particular story, what we're trying to do is get people part of this conversation so they understand this scholarship and conversations that are happening that actually allow us to do this history. And hopefully, if people are supportive, we'll raise the money and we'll get that film out next year, and then and then we can get people plugged in.
Yeah, and I shared the link to elusivefilms.com, and that's with a dash in between elusive films. So
Yeah.
Yvette is already on it, and she asked if you had a Kickstarter, and I said that I think the donation link is on the website. Is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. So
correct. Kickstarter. We've been debating for a while. We may still do a Kickstarter. The challenge is that as you may know, if you don't hit your goal, you don't get the money.
Yep.
So and we don't want to. We're still debating whether or not that's a risk we want for our donors. There's also GoFundMe, which really I'm not sure that fits this project. People use it for all sorts of like serious and grave things. Illness, medical bills. So we're not sure about that. In the meantime, we're communicating directly to potential donors, like perhaps your listeners. You give whatever you can. Like I said, our goal is $38,000. Add yourself to the mailing list. We communicate regularly via email and social media, obviously, and so on. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'll like I said, I'm going to share this out. I will, maybe we can do like a fun fundraiser on this channel or something so we can generate some interest, like, because I need to see this movie.
The script's written, we've got the actors, we just need to pay all the wonderful people we want to hire to shoot this. It's all for those that don't know, I'm Baltimore based. Baltimore is an incredibly vibrant creative community here. Help pay the brilliant artists, musicians, staffers, prop makers, and actors, and make this a reality.
Oh, totally. Okay. Yeah, I know. Yvette's already saying, because we did a bunch of like those small fundraisers for candidates that we supported in 2020, and we called it Sippin' and Chippin'. It's like you're sipping and chip. And she's saying sip and kill Nazis should be our next one. So
hey, that works for me.
Maybe we'll figure something out, because this is such a great story, and it has everything people love. People love seeing Nazis get what's coming to them. And I feel like people need to be reminded of that, especially nowadays, because I mean, as someone, I see you tweet about this all the time, but the parallels to then and now are, I mean, there's no ignoring them. They are stark.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't want to, yeah, sorry. I mean, I didn't want to skip out on this, one of the important topics you wanted to discuss that really is related to this is, the right-wing populism and the mechanisms of populism, and how similar things are to then, and kind of my linking idea here is that, in 1940, people didn't know which way it was going to go, right? Mm-hmm. Like we know now, we have this we grew up with this triumphant narrative of World War II. It's in our DNA as Americans, right? We've been exposed to it so much. But if you're on the streets of 1940 New York City, you don't really know, is America actually. You've got Father Coughlin on the radio who's preaching how great Nazi Germany is, and how they're these terrible socialists, and we got to show them. And you've got Nazis marching through the streets in Madison Square Garden. You have a political candidate in Charles Lindbergh,
That's
who
right, Lindbergh.
yeah,
Right.
who wants to dethrone the dethrone. He called him a dictator, right? He called FDR a dictator and wanted
Of
to
course,
wanted to take
naturally.
over, get rid of the New Deal, which of course is something that kind of the bedrock of the post-war America now. And as I learned, there's some Nazi connections there too.
Yeah.
His group coined the term America First, which has been resurrected now by the Republican
Let's back
Party.
up. Let's just reiterate that so that people don't miss it. Um, America First, that phrase and that sort of originated by Nazi sympathizers. So
Yep, yep.
just
Very fine people, as we've
very
heard.
fine on both sides. Very fine
Right,
people.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Oh my. Well, also interesting. I remember learning this and it blew my mind. Prior to World War II, German was the second most popular language spoken at home in
Hmm.
American households.
Yeah, yeah.
It was only post World War II where that kind of became taboo or a little
Yeah.
gauche. But
Well, I
yeah.
mean, the history of America, immigration in America, prior to kind of the explosion of immigration in the late 19th century, the largest immigrant groups in the U.S. were Germans,
Mhm.
including my own family.
Mhm.
My family were German immigrants that came kind of towards the end of the late 19th century. So similar story there. And yeah, if you catch the episode, our podcast episode with Britt Tevis, I think it's episode 3. I hope I'm not wrong there. Anyway, it's one of the earlier episodes. It's where we talk about anti-Semitism. These immigrant groups create some interesting political dynamics, but populism.
Yes,
Don't want to forget.
populism.
So it's something I've been. I mean, if you follow my Twitter, I talk about it probably to the point where it gets annoying. But it's just something I feel I've been thinking a lot about since 2015, really.
Mm.
And it's something I care a lot about, and it's a word that I think helps describe what our political dynamics in a way that's not. It's starting to creep into our discourse, but it's still a little bit. I think we need to talk about it more, and it's just because it knows no left or right wing, right?
Hmm.
It's populism is the idea that you're angry, you have anger, and you want to express that through your politics, and you want to personify it through a leader who expresses that anger for you. And the irony is that populism is a mechanism too. Like there can be candidates who use populism but may not be populists
Mm.
with a capital P themselves. Um, and it's kind of like I call it like a spice that can poison you in politics. Like even
Mm.
a little bit might seem okay, but over time it's going to kill us. Like
Right.
literally, populism is what's causing people to take horse medicine
Oh
instead of get a
God.
vaccine,
Yeah.
right? It's this idea that no one. It's because you're arguing with emotions. There's conspiracy theory. There's suspicion of any type of intellectual authority, any kind of authority, for that matter, because it's really the authority is in the populist emotions, which you
Mm.
can't, as you well know, it's like you can't argue with somebody's emotions, right?
No.
And so right wing populism is especially lethal because it can morph into fascism. Um,
Mm.
but there's left wing populism too, and so by kind of shedding a light on this, I want people to kind of help identify. It's like, and I think one nerve that I really touched recently is that how you discern populism from other types of politics, particularly from progressivism, where it gets kind of sticky, is what's the outcome. Like intent is fine and dandy. I want to change the world. I want to make the world a better place. But was the outcome I got angry and I yelled a lot, or was the outcome I actually did
Hmm.
something to help people, like in some way, shape, or form? Did
Interesting.
it actually lead to people you've never met, who have the who may not have any power in society but desperately need help?
Huh.
Um, were those people helped? So that's kind of and so and populism was of course alive and well in 1940 with these the Rush Limbaughs of their time, this radio preacher,
Hmm.
Nazi various Nazi groups marching in the street, America First. Um, there was there was all sorts of like many kind of demagogues out there, and now today, of course, I feel like we're just awash in populism. Just so much anger,
Yeah.
so much outrage
Yeah.
constantly,
So,
and
a quick
yeah,
question, just a quick question, because I know you touched on it a little bit, but I want to make sure we have a distinction. This question comes from Yvette, and she
yeah,
says, just what's the difference between left and right populism? So, in identifying it, because we've identified some of the common threads, but what are
right.
the key distinctions of the two?
Yeah. So there's debate among scholars and in the discourse about every type of big idea, what the definition of it is, right? So everybody's going to have different ideas. So I find defining terms in these discussions, or at least even if you're going to debate them, at least to talk about that, because we take it for granted so much when we're just out there and in the bare knuckle world of Twitter or wherever else, that we don't
Hmm.
even stop to. So for me, okay, so leftism to me is solidarity is like kind of the key concept. Solidarity with people who have less power, who traditionally or historically oppressed groups. And that could be pretty much any group other than white affluent straight Christian males.
Yeah.
If you're Jewish like me, it's like solidarity with Jews, or
Hmm.
women. We have to have solidarity with women right now with this
Oh,
terrible Texas laws
yeah.
and other places. Solidarity with people of color, Black people,
Hmm.
for, form the formerly refugees.
Hmm.
So to me that's kind of the key idea of leftism. Progressivism is kind of like the action part of leftism for me. Is progressivism is like, okay, I want to do the most amount of good to the greatest group of people who have the least amount of power, and I want to build the largest possible constituency coalition to do that, to actually pass policy. That's kind of like progressive, and by its very nature,
Mm.
it's not satisfying. It doesn't have an endpoint. It's constantly kind of going back to the drawing board and reevaluating what did this work, how can we make it better. It's kind of continually, and it's frustrating to the populist, where no matter what it is, Yvette, I swear I'm getting to your answer here. I'm just working my way to it. Uh, is that populism, because the primary top thing that populists prioritize is expressions of outrage. Everything
Mm.
else is kind of secondary. So if they're a populist that uses progressive language,
Okay.
or frames themselves as a leftist or a progressive, they're actually populists. They may be like, well, they didn't pass they didn't pass the law exactly as they want, so they're evil and terrible, and we're going to condemn them forever. Or
Right.
a right and a right wing populist may be like, well, they didn't let us completely dominate everything, so they're terrible and evil, and we don't like them.
Of
And it's
course.
funny because populism has this kind of inherent anti-authority streak, which is ironic because typically they'll choose leaders, and then it's like whatever the leader says, they identify so much with the leader that it's creating authoritarianism unto itself. But emotions aren't rational,
Right.
so populists are constantly kind of saying, using terms like there's the establishment, or
Yeah.
the mainstream media, or and
Mm.
neoliberals, corporate America, and it's funny, like you can kind of see it interchangeable when these groups kind of get fuzzy and intermingle. It's red brown alliance I've heard in the past. I don't know. I,
Yeah.
I don't I don't know what that. There's
It's
there's
It's garbage.
layers that I don't.
It
Yeah,
really
but
is. What I like to call it is it's really just it's rallying against the system and the
mhm,
man, and and that's really the beginning and end of their political ideology. And so
right,
it's not really grounded. It doesn't seem to be grounded in making life better for people. It
right.
seems to be just grounded in rallying against authority.
Right, because it's whatever. Because ultimately, it's whatever can serve the outrage addiction. It's
Hmm.
because that's the outrage is. If you draw the line long enough, it always goes back to what can I be mad about for the populace. And
Yes.
don't take it from me. There are folks that have the great Richard Hofstadter, who, if you go to school to study history, wrote this very influential essay called "The Paranoid Style." In American politics, in Harper's, and then eventually that expanded to a book. I believe that the essay was first, and then the book. Could be wrong. And it kind of, and this is he was describing this back in the late 50s, early 60s, but the dynamics and the attributes are very much the same. Like connecting just the rage to like the Barry Goldwater movement and kind of where
Mm.
like Republican Party started to just have this like section of it that was just like all out like just rageaholics. Wasn't even the facade of any kind of governance was just gone by then. And fortunately Goldwater lost in landslide because people saw like how nuts it was. But then of course by the time you get to Reagan, they managed to workshop it enough
Hmm.
to uh,
They
to
made it
take power.
palatable, right? They made it
Yeah.
palatable. And then that brings us to now where we elected Trump, and
Yes.
came scary close to doing it again. I'm glad we didn't, but it was still closer than I think a lot of us would have hoped. Um, and that's kind of scary. I don't you've talked about, I think in your last episode of your podcast, I love this phrase. It's like the politics of perpetual outrage.
Yeah, yeah. David Walsh, our guest, has been working on right wing populism for a long time. I think he's going to kill me if I get this right. I think he's at UVA, but
Okay.
he's adapting his dissertation research to a book right now. But essentially, one of the perpetual outrage, and one of the big questions I had actually referencing what you brought up earlier with Tucker Carlson and Viktor Orban is like
Hmm.
it's like a contagion. I wrote a piece called a while ago called "Populism's a Virus," and the scary part is that when you have populists, right wing populists in particular, trying to go out and form alliances with other kind of like mini Trumps, mini dictators. I mean, we have them all over the place. It's
Hmm.
Bolsonaro in Brazil. Erdogan in Turkey, Putin, of course, in Russia,
Hmm.
and you have the Orbans. Poland's got a right wing government. You've got fascists in France. You've got the Brexit people. It's just everywhere, and so and it just scarily enough, just like in the 30s prior to World War II, it was the same thing. There are all these kind of like mini Hitlers all
Right.
around, including in America. All these right wing populist movements, and then kind of morphing into fascism, and then as we saw in World War II in Europe, many joining forces under kind of the Nazi regime. Although there's
Yeah.
some interesting stories there. But what right wing populists, populists in general, don't seem to get until it's too late is that there can be only one populace. If outrage is your religion,
Right.
people are going to turn on you eventually,
Of
and it's
course.
really easy to go from being in the in group where you're the ultimate savior to the out group irredeemable enemies, because
Right.
that's their whole practice. That's all they do is separate allies and enemies constantly. That's
Totally.
also how you can identify populists too, of any kind of variety, left, right. Is this group constantly separating people into allies and enemies, or are they actually making a plan to do something?
That's
Uh,
that's fascinating too, because I think what and this is what we see playing out in US politics is that it's one thing to express all this outrage and to place blame and to have these grievances, but it's another thing to be then in a position to govern and change it and then do nothing, and then you still have to look externally for who to blame, because
Right.
otherwise that blame's just going to come right back to you, because that's how you fueled this entire machine, and that's how people now are thinking about politics in general, is just like grievances and who to place the blame. That's really interesting. And I think we probably that makes me think of like during World War II, where they were prior to World War II drumming up they relied on anti-Semitism
Yep.
to make Jews the bad guy in this, and blaming the problems on them. And now we're seeing that mirrored with immigrants, with
Yep.
just people who aren't cis straight white men.
Yeah.
Like, so
Populists love a good
interesting.
conspiracy theory. I mean, that's
Yes.
the Trump people. The whole Trump movement's a populist movement, right? It's and it's funny because how the oldest, most popular conspiracy of them all, you just keep going back, is anti-Semitism, but it's like
Mhm.
it's so connected to all the other kind of racist conspiracy, sexist, homophobic,
Well,
you name it.
every time I see anyone say something about like, oh, it's just as George Soros funded, I'm like, that's like I can't even call it a dog whistle for anti-Semitism anymore, because I'm like, come on, you know
Yeah,
what you're
yeah, people
doing.
know.
Yeah,
People
you
know.
know what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, we
Yeah.
even just saw that today. What was it on? And I try to call this out on the left just as often as I
I
call
see
it out when
that.
I
I
see it.
appreciate it.
Yeah, but like with what is it, Brianna Greyjoy,
Oh yeah, Bree Bree.
Bree Bree, yeah, where saying that a woman who
On
is
Rosh Hashanah.
on Rosh on the Jewish New Year, come on,
This is an. I'm
like,
so glad to be here. This is an auspicious day. I've been in synagogue all day. I've been
oh
cooking
my gosh,
traditional meals, and now I get to talk about uh, these these issues. It's funny because it's like, yeah, if you care about leftism, progressivism, which I do
mhm,
very deeply. I don't let anybody define it for me. I'm left wing, and I define what that means for myself. And for me, it's the core idea is solidarity. And
yep,
as long as I keep that in mind, that makes me left wing. And I'm a progressive in that, like, I'm
yep,
interested in taking that idea and translating into policy and building coalitions to do that and electing representatives to do that and doing whatever else I can. And so those are the core ideas for me. But it's like when I see people being like this, it's like you're ruining this
right,
important thing. So it's like we have to call it out. We have to, and the thing is, you can level with people. It's like,
hmm,
yes, I know we're all upset. This is an extremely hard time. I'm in synagogue and we're talking about the pandemic, and like this is we're supposed to be celebrating and looking forward to a new year, and look where we are right now. it's
hmm,
it's a, it's a scary time, but it's we have to actually, this is something I wanted to mention, is that we
yeah,
have to keep the faith.
hmm,
We have to keep the faith because the future is not written, and otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of studying history
right,
if we're all doomed? What's the point of caring about leftivism or progressivism if it's all gonna not matter, and we're
right.
all running to destruction anyway? So
Yeah, I mean that's kind of, I mean that's why I love having you on my stream, because I try to instill that same degree of optimism in people, and saying, look, like, you have so much power as someone who cares, as someone who wants to learn or wants to get involved, and you can make a massive difference. The tides can turn so quickly based on the effort of a few people who care and are putting in the time and the energy to try to make something happen, to try to change things. Like,
absolutely.
that's it's keeping the faith, and
Yeah.
I think otherwise you can get so many people that are just perpetuating this politics of grievances and anger. And it's okay to be angry. I get pissed off when I see the fact that a woman, a dead body, if it's a woman, has more bodily autonomy than a woman who wants to get an abortion, who's alive in Texas. That
Yeah.
pisses me off. But I know that, like, I'm going to still fight to make it better, because, like, so many women are counting on me and counting on everyone else to do that. So, even though I can be pissed off, I'm going to translate that into energy that is action oriented. It's like, great, let's
Yeah,
do something.
exactly.
Um, but yeah,
Exactly.
I agree. I mean, woo. Also,
Yeah.
everyone in chat, by the way, is just like blown away by
Ah,
everything, and they
that's
and like when you
wonderful.
were saying like, sorry, I'm taking the long way to the point. They're like, we don't care. Like we're just learning. So
I learned something today. So I think I think it's Hebrew. Sometimes it's Aramaic if it's coming out of the Torah. Some of it's, but I learned that the word amuna, which is in one of its translations, is faith, keeping the faith, which is kind of a key topic in Rosh Hashanah. So very relevant to today. Is this the root of the word amen, which you say to kind of echo or to support something somebody says, like amen to that, right?
yep,
The root comes from the same word.
yeah, the
They've got similar
AM,
root.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's like when you're saying amen to somebody, when you're reflecting and supporting and showing solidarity with what they're saying, you're also keeping faith with them. And so that's what we have to do. We have to keep the faith. We can't give in to despair. For me, I'm not particularly religious. It may sound like I am. I feel like I got way more connected to my Jewish community after Tree of Life shooting.
mm,
I just felt
mm,
like, now they have security at my synagogue. I have to go. I have to support.
yeah, of course,
And I studied. I worked at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C. at the Center for Advanced
that's
Holocaust
right,
Studies. Been working on that for a long time,
that's right.
and kind of, people. EJ, my co-host on the podcast, asked me once. It's like, so you study the Holocaust all the time, and you're constantly thinking and writing and talking about these dark, terrible things. And I responded to him, well, I'm an optimist. And he laughed. He said, here's the optimistic Holocaust scholar. But my rejoinder to that is, we got through that. And if human beings can get through that,
Mhm,
we can get through anything that's coming at us. I mean, the
mhm.
people in those situations are facing things I can scarcely imagine, even being an expert somewhat in these areas. And if they can do that, we can keep the faith in this particular time in the pandemic and with this orgy of outrage, left, right, and center. It seems in American politics right now in the world, we can do that. And I think, to me, history is kind of a practice of mindfulness, right? Like, what are the facts? Let's get like, hey, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What are the facts on the ground? And then once we know those, then we can create, as you said, a plan of action and
Yeah.
move forward. And then there's that hope springs from that, and from hope we have energy to fight another day.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I agree. Like, and I think last time we talked about this too. A good friend of mine from college, also she interned one summer at the Holocaust Museum in DC, and she ended up go like she was. I knew her when we were undergrad, but I think she also studied that in grad school as well. And I just remember her even in undergrad because she was writing her like honors thesis on the Holocaust, and how I would send her like fun videos because she would need like things to cheer her up during all of this like reading and writing really heavy material. And
It's
so,
rough. It's
yeah,
rough.
I'd have to
Yeah,
check in. I'd be like, hey, do you need like a pick me up or a break to like
that's great.
revive your beliefs in humanity and like your faith in humanity.
You're right.
So I can, but I mean, I feel like for the people that study this kind of thing, it behooves you to be an optimist because you can view it through that lens of like, we got through this.
Right.
And that speaks to the resilience of humanity. And that, I mean, and just how powerful we can be as human beings to get through the unthinkable. I had a couple
Yeah. Yeah.
questions from my
Yes.
audience for
Yes.
you.
Sorry, going off, but
Yeah.
please.
No, but like someone asked Dr. J, how much do you think the anti-communism in the United States is driven or related to anti-Semitism?
Yes. I mean, that's we could go on and on about that, but yes, they are connected. There's a historical connection here, documented going back quite a long way. I mean, before communism was even really a concept that we talked about, or a word, anti-socialism, coded as anti-Semitism, goes back to the 19th century in America and other places. I mean, you can listen to our anti-Semitism episode on our podcast. We go into great detail on. I think we touch upon that subject. We more than touch upon. We explore that a bit. And then, of course, that also comes up in some of the other discussions. But yeah, this is a very long tradition of connecting socialists and communists to Judaism, to Jewry, both in the United States and in Europe. And I think probably most notably, I won't go off forever, but just as an example, most notably amplified by this pamphlet, essentially, this piece of propaganda called the Protocols, the Elders of Zion, which was created in Russia specifically to attack Jews who were part of the nascent communist movement there prior to the Soviet Union. The ruling powers. Rasputin et al., who did not like the Jews, kind of helped create this propaganda. It was the meme of its day, and it got passed around. So one person it really influenced was Henry Ford. Henry Ford got a hold of this, who was a populist, who loved conspiracy theories, and he had this. He used to tap his jacket pocket. He'd be like, "I've got the truth right here," and he'd tap his jacket. And he probably had a copy of it. He republished it. He bought a failing newspaper and then republished it in English.
I love this story about the failing newspaper, because wasn't he this was before he was going on trial, wasn't it?
So, well, he went on trial for what he printed in the newspaper. Jews eventually sued him, although that was so again, not to belabor the point. We do a whole episode on that with Dr. Weisty, we talked about earlier.
That's where I learned about it. Was your episode?
She's so great. She was a hero of mine. I was exposed to her work and getting a master's degree. Didn't know her at all. I met her on Twitter, as I met you, and we became friends on there. And then many years later, then did this episode. Because I was just her work on Henry Ford and kind of tracing this story of propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda, which very much, again, to return to the original question, very much connected socialism and communism to Jews as an argument for anti-Semitism.
Yeah. All right. Another question comes from someone. This is North Countryman, who is one of my favorites. He is a professor of political science and brings some class and smarts to my panel, or to my channel from time to time. So I'm very grateful.
Fantastic.
And
I hope I can answer.
Oh yeah, no, it's a good question though. So he says, how does Nazi sympathy in the U.S. compare to Nazi sympathy in the UK? So when you think about the form that it took in both of those countries, how do they compare?
Yeah. Now it's been a while since I've thought about this. I got my master's in modern Europe, but then switched to US. So I've kind of got my foot in both worlds for history scholarship and work. But obviously the Europe stuff was quite some time ago now. And I'm thinking back to because some of my closer colleagues were modern British historians. I'm trying to think. Some of them who actually worked on this. And I'm trying to think back to our conversations. This is like 2010, 2011. I could talk out of my ass here, and I'm not sure I should, but what I recall, and I could be wrong here, you'll have to check me.
Yeah, it's all good.
Is that the experience is very different in so far as, up to a certain point, the dynamics are similar because there's some cultural and political kinship between UK and US. There, obviously there still is today for obvious reasons. But once the war, and I mean, this is reflected in UK politics at the time, and talking about the 30s, like there was very much kind of a right-wing populist vibe. You had Neville Chamberlain, who was kind of the person who enabled Hitler, who went to Munich and kind of famously gave Hitler a pass, and said, we trust him.
Right.
He's not going to do anything more. He just wanted little pieces of his neighbors, and he promises he won't do anything else. And so I think that gave cover to right wing populists, because there were other groups. It was like the black shirts, I believe. It was all about the color of the shirts, right? Brown shirts, silver shirts, black shirts. They're all Nazis. But
they're not very creative people. Let's just put it that way.
No, that's it. Just mad all the time. You don't have time to contemplate.
Time to be creative.
Right? Yeah. right. So, although they're really good at propaganda too, so maybe so.
Well,
maybe some pushback there. So
we see that today still, but and it's funny because anyone that knows anything about how propaganda is created and circulates, you can spot it like nothing. Like, it's just so easy. But the thing is that it's still, it is directly connected to human psychology. And that's why even when you can identify it for what it is, that doesn't take away its power, because it plays right into how to stir up people's fears, how to adjust how people perceive reality. It's wild. Yeah.
But just to complete my thought for the question,
of course,
I think up to the point, the difference between U.S. and U.K. is up to the point where the war actually starts, and then it becomes real, especially once you get to the fall of 1940 and the Blitz. I think, and enter Winston Churchill. I think basically up to that point, you could have very similar dynamics. But then obviously Britain's experience is very different than U.S. Once it's like, holy crap, they're bombing us, we may not survive this, and then of course that is this profound effect on British politics that moment. Anyway, up and until that point, there are some similar dynamics. I think that's safe. I think that's a safe thing to say.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this is really helpful. I think, it's something I've thought about as well, because we see certain political movements or sympathies proliferate much more broadly in the United States, whereas it still exists in the UK, but to a different degree. And so it's just, it's interesting to think about the nuances and things that happened, 80 years ago that we're still feeling the ripples of today. And then, of course, another question that is asked, which I'm all about, someone was like, when is Jay coming back? When is he coming back on? I agree. We definitely, I am all for this idea of doing like a fundraiser for, I think, so much. But, if we do that, you're gonna need to come prepared with some intrigue, Nazi related adjacent stories and some fun.
Oh,
I know you have. I know you have so many. So I'm just giving you a heads up that I think that's what the people want. North Countryman asks $1 million question to end on, because I also want to be respectful of your time. I know you're on the East Coast, so I don't want to keep you up till God knows when. He says $1 million question: footnotes or endnotes?
I'm a footnote fan. I mean, that's what we're trained as historians, Chicago style. That's just a thing. I work professionally as a science writer, so I've had to use all different kinds of different note styles. A piece I'm working on right now for the Office of Behavioral Social Science Research, we're using endnotes. It's just a matter of genre. For history, I think in particular, it's useful because you'll have a claim on there, and maybe it's like, is that true? And it's like, then you should have the site right there at the bottom of the page. So you could, in theory, you could follow up and you could find that right away. It's one of the reasons why footnotes need to be clear and help people find stuff. One of the big frustrations, we can definitely talk about this when I come back. One of the big frustrations in my field is that there are a lot of non-historian kind of conspiracy theory writers, including maybe some of the people who might be well known in my field, are actually not historians. I'm not going to name names because some of them are litigious, uh, but you want
But
to,
you know who you are. You know who you are.
you know who you are, buddy. Um, well, we could always talk about your footnotes in court. But yeah, you don't want to use. They can be used to obscure and not enlighten. So for me, I think it's good. And I think I have to check. I think you can order my dissertation off ProQuest. You can find it. It's called "At the Crossroads of Fascism." But I've hidden an Easter egg in my footnotes. I did it for my dissertation committee to give me a little bit of build my own self confidence, which is the defense and the final act is very nerve wracking. So I put something in there because I felt like if they didn't read it, that meant I got like one over on them, and I didn't have to feel so bad about being this big at the defense table.
Did they catch it?
If you no, they did not.
Wow.
In fact, nobody's brought it to me yet. Nobody's discovered it on their own. Only I've told people about it. I won't say where it is. So if you manage to get a hold of it and you look, it's in there somewhere.
Okay.
And it's a fun little story. And I can talk more about it next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also was like, we totally skipped over. You were talking about how you've been working with FBI historian or like the FBI,
Yes.
and I was like, they have there's an FBI that's a thing, really.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, so I guess my final question is, I know there's a ton of different source material that you can go through to uncover these stories, including like firsthand accounts. What was maybe a source, whether it's like an archive or business records, but what did you find helped you uncover like the most salacious of details, or like the things that those like, I don't know if they're called Easter eggs, but like those like golden nuggets where you're like, what was there one source or a type of source that lended itself well to that?
Yeah, I mean that's it, when you finally get to the upper, if you stick around history graduate school long enough, you learn that there really aren't too many smoking guns. That like everybody wants to find one of these smoking gun documents that really like says very clearly this thing expresses this big point we want to make about a particular historical topic. But I found a smoking gun once, and in fact, it was used. I happened to find it around the time I was working for the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C. and it was used in an exhibit on business and Nazi Germany, and it was actually in our tax dollars pay to house huge amounts of documents in College Park, Maryland, which is not far from me, at the National Archives, not the museum that you go to in DC, but College Archives 2, College Park, which is actual research center where people from all over the world go do research. And there's massive amounts of records. I spent a lot of time in the FBI records, Department of Justice records, and State Department records.
Mm-hmm.
State Department, I wanted to we had an embassy in Berlin, and we actually had like a commercial attaché office. So a section that deals with American business and Germany throughout the entire 30s. So I zeroed in on that. It's one area where I did a lot of research. I mean, I've been in archives all over the place. The General Motors archives at Yale, the Ford archives in Dearborn, the IBM archives at NYU. There's archives in the National Archive System in Germany, and many other places. Lots of other stuff. But this particular smoking gun document, to finish out, I found in the State Department records. It was a memo from executives at Coca-Cola.
Okay.
and it was a letter that was circulated, commercial attaché office, our embassy in Berlin got it. I think it was dated 1939, the fall 1939. It was like, and it's read something like, this is from the Coca-Cola people. It's something like, "We're so excited and happy for this operation we just pulled off. We just flew out cases lots, like hundreds or maybe thousands of cases of Coca-Cola to patriotic German troops on the Polish frontier in the first weeks of September 1939. That has helped ingratiate us with the German government so that we may get extra supplies of raw materials to help further our production and expand our market share of non-alcoholic drinks in Central Europe. We're so excited that we were able to pull off this campaign. I know. Yep, that's it. So
How could you betray me?
I know. I mean,
I know, but
but it was like, there it is. They literally flew out cases of Coca-Cola to invading Nazi troops, were super proud of themselves, and then also managed to say something like, and this is actually going to help us with the Hitler regime, so we'll get more raw materials than maybe some of our competitors. So,
woo! And you just found that in archives where you
yeah. Mm-hmm. Word to the wise, friends, especially all you I do my own research types of folks out there. Most documents are not digitized and are not online. You actually have to go to an archive to do research. I think I'm not sure. I'm just going to say it's true because I haven't heard anyone or seen anything else. I think I have the largest digital collection of documents related to American business in Nazi Germany. And mostly it's because I used my phone. I just, you shoot every single page of a folder, and then you do that again. You do that all day for 8 hours. Then you create a PDF of them, and then you have your digital collection of a file. And I did that for years. I think I have something like, I don't know, and somewhere in the realm of 50 to 100,000 pages of documents. So that State Department collection, it's not digitized. I made a curated digital collection of some of those records. You have to get permission of the National Archives, which I did,
but still, that's, I mean, I think that's also something I wanted to drive home to people who are like, love history, or like you said, do their own research, whatever. It's like the research that historians do, a lot of it's not sexy. It's a lot of just like diving through correspondence. The vast majority is going to be like uninteresting and isn't really going to shed a light on much, but it's that kind of research where it's like an anthropological dig. You have to like go through all the dirt and dust off the sand, and then you uncover these incredible stories and narratives that have real life impact on where we are today.
Oh my gosh, this is making me think of so many stories I could tell right now.
I'm not kicking you off. I'm not kicking you off.
Oh man, gosh, there's so many things. Well, okay. I'll leave your listeners with one more tantalizing example as a lead into my final plea. Please go to elusive-films.com. That's again ELUSIVE-films.com. Donate, join our mailing list, listen to our podcast, comment, like it. Get us out there. Tell your friends. We have 4 more episodes for season 1 that'll take us to late fall, and then EJ and I are already planning out episodes for season 2. Hopefully, that'll be out towards the beginning of next year, and help us fund this short film with Keir DeLay as Henry Ford. It's going to be really exciting. You can read about it on our website. We have a pilot episode with our team's already working on, which the short film is just a slice. Anyway, here's my cool story to leave you on to help support. So one of the most in the business scholarship, not just history, but just business scholarship world in general. If you go to get a business degree, you're probably going to hear about Alfred Dupont Chandler. He wrote a famous book called The Visible Hand. He was a professor at Harvard for many, many years. But he was also very well connected to General Motors. He was friends with Alfred P. Sloan, who was the very famous head of General Motors, who built up the company to make it what it is today. There's you might hear the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation mentioned on NPR. He's very. But anyway, Chandler helped Alfred P. Sloan write his memoirs, which are very interesting if you're a scholar in my area, because I think General Motors business in Germany takes all of a page and a half, I think. And it's mostly And then I learned, and I had done. I went to Boston College and used to live right down the street from Harvard Business School. And if you want to do research on corporate corruption, Harvard Business School's Baker Library is a good place to start. There's my pitch to them. They probably won't like it, but it's a
Also,
great
let's
place
be
to do
honest,
research.
people, graduates from Harvard Business School, you're going to find come up in a lot of those. But continue.
Well, yeah, precisely. So yeah, and
They also
what's
wouldn't
great
love someone
is
saying that.
although what's great is when they pass away and then their papers become part of the collection there, and then somebody like me actually really benefits from having those papers to look at. I have a very long piece called "The Contradiction of Neutrality" on my blog, which you can read, which is all about research I've done there. My blog is I think it's just jasonweixelbaum.wordpress.com,
Okay.
or Jason. It's Jason Weixelbaum Publications and Research. If
I'm
you
going to look it
Google
up
my
and I'm going to
full,
post the
yeah,
link. Yeah.
yeah. I haven't used it for a while. The last two pieces are the piece I wrote in the Washington Post a while ago. I haven't really been using my blog much. But anyway, back to Alfred Dupont Chandler. So he passed away. He was a professor at Harvard Business School, and he left his papers behind. And when I started thinking about Alfred P. Sloan's memoirs, and there's a whole section of his collection there has to do with the writing of these memoirs and the decisions they made. And this is something I really like. This is kind of like the inside story of like, okay, what did they do to remember or forget this really important history about how General Motors basically helped Nazis invade everybody by building tens of thousands of trucks and some other things too.
Yep.
And it turns out and I don't think this was necessarily on purpose secretive, although maybe it is. Alfred Dupont Chandler had basically a cipher for his filing system. So it was all in code,
Huh.
basically. So he has all these different cards that had pieces of research on them, and they were all numbered and they related to other cards. And you needed the key to understand that. And nobody apparently nobody they just housed all this stuff and nobody figured it out, nobody even noticed, stopped caring about it. So like this very very important guy to American business, not just American but like world scholarship on business,
Yeah.
all his thoughts are encrypted essentially in a paper system that nobody has unlocked. Uh, so they're all locked up in Harvard Business School. I pitched Harvard Business School to do a postdoc there, and I think they did send me a letter back to say thank you, no thank you. But that's all they ever
Interesting.
said. But if some enterprising researcher does manage to have the time and resources, that is an incredibly interesting secret. The things that could be in there uh,
Yeah.
could be incredible, especially related to this behind the scenes story of how one of America's biggest collaborators with the Nazis decided to remember or not remember that period of history. So
Wow.
it's just sitting there waiting for somebody.
Waiting for
Or
someone to solve.
if you throw enough money in my fundraiser, maybe I'll go myself.
There we go. I was gonna say, yeah, like you already have people on the hook, Jay. So use it as a fundraising opportunity.
There we go. There
Man,
we go.
oh my!
It's not my best story, but that's one of them.
But the fact that it's still there, it's like it's a puzzle waiting to be solved, and it's just sitting there. It's just
Yep.
sitting there. So could you solve it? Could someone else solve it? Who knows?
Perhaps.
It's there. So I guess we'll see. And it's not like it's this insignificant person who had no influence on the course of history. So
Right.
like it's I think that is a great story. And
Yeah.
I can't believe that exists. And I say that every time I hear stories from you about anything, as I'm just like, I can't believe this is a thing. But yeah, I mean, Jay, like I can't thank you enough for coming back on. I'm so excited for
Thank
season
you.
2. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Someone else, I told you the other night I was streaming and talking about something different, and someone was like, I was watching your video on YouTube where you were talking with Dr. J, and like, you need to have him back on. This was fascinating. And so I was like, oh my God, are you kidding? Like, of course, Jay is welcome literally anytime he wants. If Jay, like, and I mean that. So like, anytime you're like, hey, I want to come back on and talk more about research or current events, whatever, I'll be like, let's find a time, let's do it. I would love that.
Awesome.
But and
We would love that too.
and
We'd
I will
love
give
it too. if you know, let me put it just a post out there.
Yeah.
If people are experts in crowdfunding campaigns, Kickstarters, we are looking to fill a role at Elusive Films, so that when we do come back on the show, we are more well organized and ready to do that. We're preparing for launch for a while. We're using this podcast again to build our audience. And so that when we come on again, we'll be raring to go. So hopefully somebody in Maddie's brilliant networks will be able to come and join us at Elusive Films. There's a whole team of us.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I'll send the word out, and I'm also going to. So I will, similar to the last video, I will post this onto YouTube, so everyone can check it out and learn, and hopefully just become aware of this incredible project that you're working on, and then it'll be fun, because then when it does come to fruition, and it will.
It will.
Also, I should note that as soon as North Countryman knew who Keir Dullea is, so he missed before where you were explaining how you knew him, and he's like, as in star of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I was like,
right.
you're darn tootin'. So yeah, this is super exciting. Again, thank you so much, Jay, for coming.
Thank
everyone.
You.
I shared the links to Elusive Films, the website. I also it's Jason Weixelbaum, Weixelbaum.wordpress. So I also shared that. Anything else you want to just leave as a final parting message?
There's a cliffhanger here. That's not even my best archive story. There's one I'm saving to that's real blockbuster, that involves stolen documents, very closely related to the story of this project. So I'll save that one for the next time we come back, and maybe that'll be our big press release when we break that story, because that's news unto itself.
I love it,
and we'll get more people interested in this project and to make it happen. But
awesome.
Maddie, thank you so much again. Much appreciated. Shana Tova to all who celebrate.
Yes.
Happy New Year, and solidarity. Solidarity to all. And